Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating concept, architecting the self. It's essentially a guide to personal integrity. Now, I want you to imagine just for a second that your identity, your core character, is a magnificent building, and it's currently under construction. Every single day, you are both the lead architect and the bricklayer of your own self. So, let's look at the critical errors that cause our personal structures to crack and eventually just fall apart.
It's a pretty heavy question, isn't it? What destroys a person from the inside out? We usually think of destruction as something that happens to us, right? Like a storm, an earthquake, some massive external force battering our walls. But the source material we're exploring today presents this striking shift in perspective. It reveals that we often actively, yet entirely accidentally, sabotage our own character. We're literally the ones swinging the sledgehammers at our own load-bearing walls. Crazy, right?
Okay, let's dive into this. You absolutely cannot build a sturdy foundation without a blueprint. Period. If you just start pouring concrete and stacking bricks without a master plan, you are practically guaranteeing a collapse. Our text identifies this missing blueprint as a lack of self-awareness. Look, self-awareness is the absolute ground floor of personal integrity. It's the architectural plan that tells you exactly where your strengths lie, where your hidden weaknesses are, and most importantly, what the ultimate purpose of your building actually is.
To really grasp the gravity of this, we have to contrast self-awareness with the alternative, which is, well, the void. Not being self-aware is the first critical failure in personal architecture because it leaves you building completely blind. You're out there, making choices, reacting to people, spending your incredibly precious energy, but without any internal direction. When you lack that self-awareness, you aren't an architect anymore. You're just a frantic worker, desperately trying to keep a chaotic construction site from completely shutting down.
So let's see how this builds into the next phase of our text's warning. Once a lack of self-awareness creates that initial instability, what do? We start looking outward. We transition away from our own messy construction site and start intensely focusing our energy on the neighboring buildings. And wow, this is where the structural weakness really accelerates. When you stop looking at your own foundation and obsess over the shiny skyscrapers next door, you inevitably let your own walls crumble.
Now, what's really interesting here is how the source explicitly clusters these external distractions into a specific triad of noise. We're talking about trying to control external factors, comparing yourself with others, and falling into consumerism. These are the three sirens, so to speak, that pull your focus entirely away from your foundation. They basically trick you into believing that the integrity of your building relies on the environment around it rather than the solid steel and concrete within it.
I want to pause here for a second and just really consider this exact quote from the text. Comparison is the killer of joy. Think about what joy actually is in the context of our metaphor. Joy is that deep, satisfying reward of building your own life, brick by brick, and then stepping back to admire your honest work. But the second you compare your raw materials or your messy stage of construction to someone else's finished penthouse, you instantly murder that joy. You just drain all the motivation and pride right out of your own project.
The next major distraction the text warns us against is trying to control external factors. Imagine an architect standing on a building site, literally screaming at the rain to stop falling or demanding the wind change direction, all while completely ignoring the fact that his foundation is literally sinking into the mud. That is the illusion of control. It's a massive, exhausting waste of human energy that generates immense stress and entirely distracts you from what you actually have the power to build.
And that brings us to the final external trap from our guide. Consumerism. Here's the thing. Consumerism tricks the builder into confusing the decoration for the foundation. It distracts you with this endless accumulation of materials. Buying fancier scaffolding, shinier tools, expensive facade materials, instead of cultivating the deep, invisible character required to actually keep the building standing tall. It's the ultimate superficial distraction from your inner work.
But the source text takes us way beyond just passive distractions, straight into active destruction. We're moving away from the external noise now and looking directly at the wrecking ball we bring to our own site, because this is where the damage stops being a slow, creeping crack and becomes a sudden, violent impact.
And this brilliantly illustrates what we can basically trace as a dangerous psychological pipeline. Just look at how this flows. It begins with complaining, just griping about the miseries of your life. But that complaining rapidly solidifies into blaming. You start pointing the finger at others for your poor foundation. And the terminal stage of this disease? The victim mindset. This is a sequence that fundamentally, completely strips you of your power as an architect. I just have to ask you directly, why would anyone choose this?
Why actively destroy your own foundation by adopting a victim mindset? Look, when you assign blame to the world for the miseries of your life, you are simultaneously handing the world the keys to your construction site. You're basically throwing your hands up and saying, I am not responsible for this building. It's a total surrender of personal ownership, and quite frankly, it guarantees failure.
And if you surrender that ownership, you're headed straight for the final, most devastating personal pitfall outlined in our guide. We are talking about the ultimate structural collapse of the self. This is the terrifying moment where the building doesn't just lean a little bit, it falls in on itself completely.
This collapse happens right here, living in the gap between your words and your actions. Our source material issues a really severe warning about the dangers of being inconsistent in how you live. When what you say no longer matches what you actually do, the mortar holding your bricks together basically turns to dust. You become a facade, just a building painted to look strong on the outside but completely hollow on the inside.
So the crucial point comes down to how we define this. Exactly as the text lays it out, integrity isn't just about being honest with other people. At its absolute core, integrity is standing by the promise you made to yourself. Let the gravity of that internal promise just sink in for a moment. The promises you make in the quiet of your own mind. That's the rebar inside the concrete. They are exactly what give your structure its tensile strength against the inevitable storms of life. To tie this whole architectural metaphor together, the true cost of inconsistency between your words and actions means you fundamentally lack this vital integrity. And without integrity, you aren't really a self at all. You're just a collection of competing desires and broken promises. You lose the ability to trust yourself. And think about it. When the architect can't even trust their own hands, there's absolutely no way the building can stand.
I want to leave you with this really powerful provocation, inspired directly by the text. I want you to look at your own blueprint right now. Are your actions today keeping the promise you made to yourself? Are you building with integrity, or are you getting distracted by all the noise, the comparison, and the complaints? Remember, you are the architect of your own character. Check your foundation, own your site, and build something that actually lasts. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I challenge you to go out and build wisely today.